Welcome to Getting Personal, a monthly podcast diving deep into the stories of the heartbeat of HR. Brought to you by Compt, a global lifestyle benefits platform where companies empower employees with benefits and rewards they'll use and appreciate, whoever and wherever they are in life. Today, I'm joined by Victoria Dew, the founder and CEO of Dewpoint Communications. She's spent almost 20 years helping leaders get internal comms and employee experience right, and now works with companies across industries to make sure their people feel supported and connected. Welcome, Victoria.
Hi, Lauren. I'm so glad to be with you.
I am so glad you're here because today we're going to talk about a whole host of things around worker well-being, resilience, in a positive kind of way, not in the bad resilience kind of way. But I want to start with a new report that you recently released because I think it'll set us up for everything we're going to talk about. So the report is called Connecting the Frontline, Current Trends, Challenges, and Strategic Opportunities in Workforce Communication. Give me the details. Why should people be reading this?
Okay. Well, frontline workers are play a massive role in driving the global economy. They represent actually somewhere between 70 and 80% of the entire global workforce. And this comes just as workforce participation is in a decline. So people are retiring, they're leaving the workforce, and in many skilled trades, it takes years to train people. So you have like robots are not coming for a lot of these jobs. You need more and more and more of them, and people are leaving. So there's a huge risk because deskless workers, as they're often known as well, they're hard to reach, right? Often, for
Right.
example, in construction, they're swinging hammers, or manufacturing or healthcare, they're working with patients. So they're not sitting at a desk all day, reading emails or looking at content on an intranet. So they're hard to find and they're hard to connect with, but they're really critical because they represent, you need them for, the better you can connect with your frontline workforce, the more you can improve retention, certainly, engagement, performance, innovation, safety, all those good things that contribute to the bottom line. So the thing is, though, because they are kind of hard to find, no one's really cracked the code of how to consistently and effectively engage them. That's one of the reasons why we felt like this was such an important area to look at, because improving communication with frontline workers just represents a huge competitive advantage for businesses that are able to get it right. Because we know that good communication with workers and employees, they may not always be, your workforce may not always be, employees. It represents that competitive advantage for businesses that get it right. We know that it's better for retention, safety, customer experience, well-being, resilience, and everything else that matters to business. So in this research, we focused on qualitative, in-depth interviews with communication leaders across 18 industries and sectors. So everything from manufacturing, construction, food and beverage, manufacturing, transportation, nonprofits, healthcare, energy. We wanted to learn what was working well for them now, where they're getting stuck, what some opportunities they see for advancing and improving frontline workforce communication, and some emerging best practices. And we were also listening, are there any alarm bells or persistent challenges that companies may want to heed? So based on all of that, we've developed a roadmap for how companies of any size and in any industry, whether they have a dedicated internal comms team or not, can get started making progress, improving the way they connect with their frontline workforce, because it is just competitive advantage hiding in plain sight. And Dewpoint Communications is really passionate about this research because, as you said, our work is focused on helping every company improve employee and workforce experience through effective strategic internal communication. So it's a win-win. It's better for business and it's better for the humans that we're trusting to operate those businesses.
Tell me a little bit more about the passion behind this and why you in particular are passionate about this. Obviously, we know it's important for workplaces, and you've likely seen it play out in a number of ways for the clients that you're working with. But was there something that happened at some point in your career that made you realize that this was not only important to you, but to your coworkers, to everyone else who you'd eventually be working with?
Yeah. Well, I actually spent some time, I spent a lot of my career overseas, working overseas in New Zealand, and I had the opportunity there to work in an organization that was very focused on workforce safety and injury prevention. Actually not just for workforce, but for all New Zealanders. And I think it was that work in injury prevention that I really started to realize how the interconnectedness between who we are at work and how we behave at work and the behaviors that keep us safe at work and contribute to healthy workplace cultures, and how they affect every aspect of our lives and how those decisions that we make in our personal life interact with our professional lives and our working lives. And so that I think is where I really caught the bug for connecting with frontline workforces and especially around safety and safety outcomes because everyone deserves to get home safe at night. And then a bunch of years ago, I was doing some work for a client. We were doing an audit on talking to their frontline workforce. And I remember I went and I asked them, someone this question on a client site. And it was sort of a typical question that you'd ask. And I said, "Hey, is there anything that you would like to know more of from the headquarters?" And they looked at me and they were so exasperated. And they said, it's not what I want to know more of from them. It's what I want them to know more of from me.
Right.
And I think that was that moment where it really, it's like people sometimes think that internal communication, employee communication is about talking to people and communicating messages to people. And that was, I think, that moment that really crystallized how critical it is that we're communicating with people, right? That it's two-way, that we're sharing and receiving information. And so why listening is so important.
I think that also lends to the human element. We keep using the word people, and I think we forget sometimes that communication is between people, and like you said, not one directional. And I know you've worked with a handful of SaaS platforms, and this report is about frontline workers, but I think a variety of these industries struggle with the same pitfalls. And you're always trying to bring it back to the human element. So, speaking of humans, what do you think is missing when companies treat well being as a tech problem instead of a human one? We're always trying to solve for things. And I don't think throwing more tools at people is necessarily the best approach, but you tell me.
I think that one of the key findings in this research, and something that we certainly see every day in our work with our clients at Dewpoint Communications, is that tech is a critical enabler of workforce or employee experience, but you can't abdicate a people problem to a tech solution. Right. So this is especially true when we're talking about frontline or deskless workers, because, as we said, their job often is not to be staring at screens all day. So while we absolutely have got to bridge the digital divide and figure out how to get the right tech solutions to these workers, because it can't all be analog solutions, but there's the fascinating balance between the two. While we absolutely have to bridge that divide, the truth is that managers and supervisors are actually the most trusted source of information for most workers. 70% of team engagement is directly attributable to manager effectiveness. So managers know their teams best, as humans, we heard in our both that they know them best as workers, but also as humans, as people. And we heard in our research that in many industries, and for example, construction, a crew is like a family that looks out for one another on site. Um, we heard that human connections at work are a big part of how people find meaning in their work. And this is at a time, I think, when worker well-being and resilience is being tested.
Hmm.
Something like 94% of frontline workers are facing greater mental health stress than their desk-based colleagues. We also are seeing realities like, climate change and social upheaval and economic uncertainty all compound frontline workers often already, stressful jobs. Um, we heard, for example, in our research, how wildfires have affected communities in agriculture industries, for example. And we also heard how communicating a culture of care and support is becoming more and more important, and especially as external factors start to create more risks to, business continuity. So those, I think, are some of the reasons why really solid workforce communication plays a vital role in encouraging frontline worker well-being. But it requires getting, as you say, this right blend of human connection and the technology that we need for speed and scale. And so what that looks like, that balance of analog or human-based real-time connection and communication, and tech solutions and SaaS platforms, that will be different for every company and will vary. It might even be different site to site, and the kinds of roles that people are performing might be different region to region. There's no one size fits all. And so I think what's most important is that every company really take a smart strategic look at where they are, where they want to go, and get the right blend and the right kind of balance of tools and channels in place.
Everything that you said brings me back to a prior life when I was working in an industry that was, I guess you could say, construction adjacent. I was working in fire protection and security. So
Yeah.
I was on construction job sites, but then I was also in schools and in food manufacturing facilities. I did a lot of site visits, trying to first create content, get a lot of pictures, video, customer testimonials, all the marketing things, but then also get a better understanding of what was important to our frontline workers. Call them techs. And you are so right in that the relationship with the managers was critical to them. A lot of times, those were the people that they were connecting with, airing their grievances to. And those were also the people who, if they had a good relationship with their manager, would then stay. They were critical to our retention. When anything else might not have been going right for them, or they didn't necessarily agree with leadership, or they felt disconnected from things that were maybe going on in the office because they were constantly out and about, the connection between each other and their managers was huge. I mean, you're not just standing there talking about fire sprinklers and fire alarms all day. You're asking each other uh, how your kid did at their soccer game, and how your spouse is doing at their new job. And those are the things that I think keep people around. You want to build a community, whatever that looks like.
I agree, and especially I think when jobs are hard, and all jobs are hard, but especially when you feel like you're in the trenches with someone and with
Yeah.
your teammates, that sense, Gallup has that question in their engagement survey, like, do you have a best friend at work? And people always think that question is silly, but there's something in that about like in that morning, like I think this is why that question is important. It's like in the morning when you're waking up and you're like, I don't really want to get up and go to work. And then you think about that person or the team member or the manager, supervisor who would miss you if you didn't go to work that day, or that you were planning on having lunch with, or that was gonna, you were gonna ask them about their kid's soccer game, right? That those connections with the people you work with, I think that's a lot of like often why we kind of throw off the covers and, get in the shower because we don't want to let those people down and we want to be part of their lives. And, humans crave that connection, right?
Right. And you had mentioned that these people are also hard to reach. I specifically remember that hurdle, even in trying to get people involved in some of the more fun things, like when we were trying to bring people in for just company events or get them involved in trainings and whatever else. And I mean, even just trying to get people to track mileage in their business expense apps, and connecting them to technology was a little bit difficult. And it wasn't even necessarily a generational thing. It was I'm out here swinging a hammer. I don't have time for this kind of thing. So how are you finding maybe as a result of your research that employees or employers are better supporting and connecting with those teams. Is there something new or a better way to do this?
I think there's lots of better ways, and that was one of the really fun parts of this research was asking people like, "What's working well right now?" We heard about, for example, and I think it's knowing your people, knowing the like, audiences, and coming up with the right fit at the right time, right? So, for example, we heard about something that might seem as simple as um, meeting, workers at the turnstile when they're leaving work at the end of the day and they're clocking out, in the coming the turnstile, meeting people there and having a band or an opportunity to engage, right? We heard about how companies use digital signage, and all these different kind of ways. We heard about one of the ones examples I really loved was um, having a like internal kind of conferences where they had vendors come in and do training for employees on how to better use the products. But they basically started sort of like internal trade shows, and like the CEO would come and do town halls. So they were really high value, rich, event-based experiences that both served as kind of an L&D training opportunity, created connection, something a little bit different, an opportunity to connect with the larger organization. So I think there's all these different kind of creative ways that companies can do that, and those are some nice examples of how kind of combining both analog, IRL and digital solutions. But I think one of the most important things, as I said, that companies get really, you can't do that without the listening piece, right? So
Right.
one of the most important things that companies can do is just get really good at listening. Um, I've been working in the field, the specific discipline of internal communications for nearly 20 years. Um, and we've always had to, as I say, battle this misconception that internal or employee communication or organizational communication, is just about telling people stuff or sending newsletters or town halls. And as we see, as we're talking about it, it's a lot more nuanced. And that line of sight to business outcomes is obvious, but especially when it comes to frontline desk work or deskless workers, because the ROI, we can just see the maths, right?
Yep.
And that example of it's not what I want to know more of from them. It's what I want them to know more of from me. I feel like that has always stuck with me and shaped my approach. But no matter how you do it, um, listening has to go beyond an annual engagement survey, because first of all, that's retrospective, and companies have to get better at ongoing listening, um, and responding. Right? This is an ongoing year-round work stream. It has to become like brushing your teeth. One of the things we heard in the research was, I wish I could have someone site level, right, a
Mm,
communications person on every site, because so that they could say, oh, this won't work here, this will work better here, right? So again, that really nuanced approach, right message, right person, right time, right channel, right place, and that listening piece. And I think I've just seen it can be really transformative for companies, and especially if you're rolling out new tech. We do a lot of employee consultation for clients when they're even just thinking about a new intranet or a new digital employee experience platform. And just the act of talking to people about what's most important to them helps to increase adoption because they have that buy-in. They feel like they're part of
right.
co-creating the solution. And we heard this in the research. One company shared that because they did really good consultation and co-creation with the front lines, they had massive, something like 70%, 8% adoption of the new
Wow.
platform. But you've also got to remember that it's an ongoing change management program, right? It's not just like a campaign.
Hmm.
Change management is about shifting behaviors. So you said we did, and I think people don't get survey fatigue. They get tired of being asked for their opinion and then nothing happening or nothing changing.
Right. Yes. that that is so true. I've heard that from so many people. I've experienced it myself. Um, it's interesting that there is so much nuance to the communication piece because talk about these concepts, you hear about them, the bring people along for the ride. Don't just deliver something to them. If you want stakeholder buy in, bring them in early on, build the thing with them. don't communicate at people, listen to them as well. Uh, but it seems like we have just historically been missing the mark in that, and we continue to. I don't know if that's something that you've seen in your nearly 20 years of experience, if that's always been the case, if it's been the most misunderstood part about the, return on investment and caring for these frontline employees, or if it's a whole mishmash of things.
I think there are a lot of historical reasons why it's always been like that. And fascinating and also really nuanced and different for everyone. And that's a whole other episode of why it is the way it is. But one of the things I think is really important is like, look, we know how fast the world is changing, and that's why this is such an important opportunity because the way, like, what got us here won't get us where we need to go next.
Right.
What has worked in the past will just not work in the future. So it is time, like, things have to change. We're at this tipping point, and especially with the tech piece, like, we know that when people go in, frontline workers go into the break room, they're sitting there looking at their phones. Like, they
Yeah.
don't not have phones. They're consuming something. They're just not consuming your content. And I think so there is this tipping point because it just has to be solved for. And I guess again, as I said, the masses, and the economics of it are just too strong. And I think that's a really exciting. So how we got here is, in the past, I'm so focused on where we go from here, and how companies can do that in a way that's really sustainable and smart for them.
So we talk about, geez, everything is changing so rapidly. Um, and when you had brought up that, people are on their phones, uh, I think when we think about the technology piece, it's not that people are necessarily slow to adopt new technology. I mean, a lot of people are talking about AI, for example. It's not just some very niche thing that only tech companies are exploring. Um, I think we also need to consider that there are other factors influencing the workplace. I know earlier you had mentioned things like climate change and the impact that that has had on specific industries within your report. Fires in agriculture, violence, global instability. Everywhere you turn, something is happening out in the world, and people are bringing that into work because how do you separate those things? I want to know what you're seeing in the data that you uncovered in regards to these things, and then what leaders are missing when they fail to acknowledge the current climate, especially as it relates to worker well-being. Because, like I said, you can't necessarily leave all that baggage at home.
That's true. I think that's one of the things, right, that we have to remember is that people aren't robots. I have also heard about this AI thing, which I think presents so many, don't even get me started because there's so many great opportunities for how that can really improve frontline workforce communication. But people are not robots. And they don't just go back into their little boxes at the end of the day and wait for it to be time to come to work. They're whole humans with complex lives, and their experience at work affects their lives at home. And um, that means that there's also no one right answer for how companies should be addressing some of the issues of the day. That's different for every company has to make their own decisions about um, how they're going to respond to the world around us and changing conditions. One thing that came up again and again in the research was the importance of really helping frontline workers to understand and navigate change. Most people do not like change, I have noticed. That's pretty universal. Change is generally hard for people. It's hard for organizations, it's hard for leaders, and it's hard for employees. But with so much disruption in the marketplace and business transformation and change initiatives are just constant, and really all internal communication is really change communication, helping people to understand change and constantly be adapting behaviors to make change successful. You have a new role at a new business strategy. You want people to understand their part in achieving the business strategy and to want to do something different, perhaps than they're doing currently, to help that to be successful. And remembering like that frontline workers, like they're really like there's a reason they're called Frontline. They're really on the pointy end of a lot of these change programs and business transformation initiatives. So we need them. And yet we're just not always that great at connecting with them. One thing that I think leaders are missing sometimes, it comes back to listening. And in many industries, frontline workers are seen as those implementers, the people that we're counting on to deliver the strategy. And we'll tell them about this change, and then we'll roll out the new strategy, and they'll go and make it happen, right? Which kind of puts them back in that little like robot zone that we tell them some stuff, and then they go off and do it, and then it's done, and we don't have to worry about it. And that's just not actually how humans work. And but there's a lot more to that because like these are actually the people who understand the company's supply chains and their customers and the
Yes.
equipment and site conditions and each other. And they know there's a lot that leaders and executives can learn from talking to and listening to folks who are on the front line and the pointy end about what's really happening and why or why not that change program, that business transformation strategy might or might not work, where it might get stuck in reality. So that a shift from implementers to, like I call them transformation operatives, that's a really exciting opportunity to change the way we engage with the front line. I think there's some stat like that CEOs or the C-suite only spend about 3% of their time with the front line, talking to the front line, which is just a big missed opportunity. So we need a new way to engage with them. And frontline workers want to hear from their C-suite. They want to talk to their managers. They want kind of day-to-day information and context from managers, but they also want to be connected to the big picture. So they want to know how they can thrive in work and in life, and especially with so much change and a sort of, a kind of crazy world out there.
That's so true. I think it also lends to the, I guess, what do I want to say here? The connection between the front line and the C suite that is in so many places, I guess, inherently a canyon apart. Um, they crave connection, they crave being understood. And I guess through that, they also kind of get this sense of job security, like the company is going in a direction that is a good one, feels comfortable. And I think this goes beyond like memos from the top down, like, okay, I got an email from my CEO, like things are going great, sure. But when the C suite specifically understands the day to day that frontline workers are going through, and those frontline workers see that they understand those things, then I think there's this, okay, we're all in this business together. They're making decisions that are going to not only benefit the business, but then benefit me. That creates a sense of loyalty, consistency. I don't know. It's just, I don't, I'm sitting here talking to you about it. And I know you probably have thought the same thing, like, wow, this sure makes a lot of sense. And yet, and yet
Yeah,
I'm not seeing it as widespread, I think, as it should be.
I will say to your point, Lauren, that one opportunity that I do think that comes up in the research that where companies miss a trick is that they already have legions of brand ambassadors
Yes.
sitting on the payroll, right? But they're not most of the time being maximized. So, like, especially thinking about companies that have brands that people interact with on a daily basis. So I'm thinking like it could be anything from like utilities, transportation, retail, food and beverage, manufacturing, the products that people have sitting, in their refrigerator. And if your people are asked a question about the company, you say where you work and they know the brand and they ask a question about the company at a barbecue or a kid's birthday or a soccer game, and they're not able to answer it in an authentic and compelling way. Then the company's kind of, flushing money down the drain because they've got these people who could be brand advocates and ambassadors and helping on a really grassroots level, community by community by community, to help the customers or prospective customers feel connected to the brand. Um,
Mhm.
and you're already paying, we're already paying them, but we don't, and not, not as marketers, but they are influencers in their communities and their families. So when we strengthen that connection with them and that engagement with them, there's a very natural byproduct that they also can be those ambassadors in the community with the very people that we're paying a lot of money to market to.
I think a really good example of how this is playing out in real time is what's happening with Starbucks. And you have to wear uniforms and you have to write on cups again. And the constant back and forth between the baristas and whatever is happening in corporate. And it's been interesting to follow because while in some scenarios you've heard good things about Starbucks, like, oh, they have a continuing education program, like tuition assistance, the partnership with Arizona State. I remember hearing all about that when I was at ASU, actually. But then you hear well, they don't understand us and they don't realize that I don't have time to like write on a cup and hand it out the window when we are just flooded with customers all the time. And then there's the either sentiment, the positive or the negative one, is heard by the general population. And you're right, like that, those are your brand ambassadors. Those are your frontline people. If they are not fully behind the mission or are feeling misunderstood, then everyone else is going to hear about it and know about it.
It's one of the really cool parts and why I'm passionate about the internal communication discipline is because this field is such a like a connector and a convener and connects the dots and is just sort of like boundary spanning and works cross-functionally really well with HR and ops and IT and the C-suite and at the site level and kind of hears all these things and is really good at looking strategically at how all the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
And especially I think in the future of AI, that is more and more and more the role that will play is convener and that real like nexus of how we do things and co-creating solutions with lots of other functions and teams because it is so nuanced, right? And requires such customization because what works in one store might not work in another. So I think that's a really cool part of the future of internal communication. And I'm very aware that not every company has an internal communication person, dedicated person, or a team. There's many companies that are small and maybe just have someone in HR who's been doing off the side, this off the side of their desk, or they may have very large teams, but that are used to working, being the sort of, creating messaging and content, but not necessarily working in this really fun and exciting strategic cross-functional way. And I think that is the most like exciting kind of future of this field and of this discipline is that every company really will want to and need to start to reconsider how it is they're connecting and communicating with their workforce.
You mentioned that oftentimes this lands on the desk or the side of the desk of somebody in HR because I know that internal comms isn't new, but it is, I think, maybe confusing to people outside of internal comms. Like, where does the function sit? If it is its own functions, a lot of times it gets umbrellaed under HR. Sometimes it sits between HR and marketing and employer branding. So I was going to ask you about a takeaway from our conversation for, HR and comms leaders, but then we also spoke about the power of managers. Uh, and I'm sitting here thinking maybe it's just on all of us to build a more resilient workplace, to build a better culture of well-being for one another. So if you had a takeaway, what would it be? And maybe who would it be for? Is it for everyone?
That's There's seven great questions in there. One of the things I want to start is saying you're exactly right. It is on all of us, and why we call that like employee experience. And it's one of the best parts of my job is creating employee experience functions and strategies and frameworks and helping companies to figure out how to create great employee experience. Because personally, I feel like internal communications, because of the some of the qualities, the boundary spanning, the connecting the dots, the critical thinking, the working, we work end to end across the business, up and down, right, and see all the different pieces of it and understand how to again really connect the dots and come up with strategic ways to solve business problems and apply a communication skill set to solving business problems and opportunities. And so I love seeing internal comms be that convener, that engine of employee experience, partly because, exactly as you said, Lauren, it is on everyone in the organization to behave in a way that creates employee experience. And it's, certainly it's the policies and programs and all of the sort of the structure, right, and the leadership and the work itself. But it is also just that day-to-day way that people behave that we also sometimes, call culture. But that is another big part of employee experience. So it's kind of a little bit of everything, right? But you asked if I had one big takeaway, and I think I would come back to that just that what got us here won't get us where we need to go next. We are in such a beautiful moment to kind of reinvent and reimagine the way we do things and the way we work, right? We really we've got a problem if we start trying to predict the future or forecast the future based on what's happened in the past, because we're in a kind of land without without a lot of precedent. So that also means that we as people, as communication professionals, as HR professionals, as business leaders, as operation professionals, we have an opportunity to um, not only mitigate the risk, right, but maximize really wonderful opportunities to create thriving, sustainable workforces, strong talent pipelines, better retention, better safety, innovation, operational excellence, all the things we need. We're in this great moment where we can really influence change. And it's not just HR policies. This will require, as I said, really strong cross-functional collaboration, HR, IT, comms, operations, EHS, all working together to come up with really smart, strategic um, roles. And internal communication can play such a really vital role in every company, in every industry, in every size. I just cannot wait to see what organizations do next.
So it sounds like this report then is truly for everyone. There is a benefit to anyone who reads this.
I think there is a lot in it for everyone. And one of the kind of the kind of some of the missing links is yes, this report is absolutely focused on frontline workforce because they're a hard problem to solve, right? And no one's completely cracked it yet. However, I think that if companies start with really looking at how they can crack frontline workforce challenges and opportunities, um, the downstream effect will be better for everyone. So I like to think, what if frontline wasn't uh, the too hard basket? What if it was the must-have basket? Like, what if this was the mandatory thing that we had to get right that would benefit everyone in every organization?
I love that. That said, where can people get their hands on this report?
They can get the report on our website, dewpointcomms.com/resources. And also, there's a lot of data and stats in the report. So we also have like an additional resource of like a little stat library because we know that HR folks and comms folks are really data driven, and
Yes.
especially when they're going to make the business case for how and why to do some of these things, they want stats. So we've got kind of an additional add-on. If people want to connect with me on LinkedIn and ask, like, just say like, can I have that stat bank? Then we'll send. It's just an additional kind of bonus resource for folks that are interested in that and might want to be making the case themselves. So they can just reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll be happy to send that. I love connecting with people. I love hearing stories about what's working and not working. It's how I continue to learn. And so really happy to do that.
Fantastic. Well, I hope that you connect with so many more people. That's kind of the whole point of this podcast. So, yeah, I just want to thank you for your time. I also have perused the report so that I could, chat with you about it today. But I really need to do a deep dive because there are so many special nuggets within it that I think will even improve the way that I do my job in my corner of HR tech.
We hope that it will be a really rich resource that people will go back to again and again and again and always find something new and relevant.
Amazing. Thank you, Victoria.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks for joining us on Getting Personal, brought to you by lifestyle benefits experts at Compt. Remember, you can always find more stories and helpful insights on our LinkedIn and blog.